I don't like the way you came in and changed things. I don't like the way you came in and changed things. I don't like the way you came in and changed things. I don't like the way you came in and changed things. I don't like the way you came in and changed things. I don't like the way you came in and saved me.
I'm Daisy Ridley.
I'm Nancy Mongeau.
I'm Kara Swisher, emotionally unavailable best-selling author.
I'm Scott Galloway. This is South by Southwest.
Funniest man in the world, Conan O'Brien. Hey, enough! No more pictures.
That's it. We're people. I'm just walking around Austin, talking to people. I can see in their eyes, we have fun, we're improvising, and then I see the lights go out of their eyes. They're like, I have to go, Conan.
It's the most receptive, amazing audience.
The audiences are very lovely here. It's a really wonderful film to watch as a group.
To coalesce as one group and put their differences aside and do something together for the good of the entire human civilization.
Civilization is built on togetherness. We need to change the dream of the modern world to a culture of true belonging.
The community here really gives me a sense of belonging.
We're here to be part of this experience, this organic thing that we are doing together right now.
We're mammals, we're meant to be together.
All of us coming together and wanting to see the world progress towards a better place.
Anyone in this room who is a part of an organization using the power of story to transform our society, we will win, y'all.
All right. right. Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon. Happy Daylight Savings Day. You guys are hanging in there. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. I am Z, like the letter. I've had the great pleasure of organizing all of the events happening this weekend in this room. Great thanks to Advanced Technology International, ATI, for sponsoring everything. This panel, the panels that happened before, and the one panel we've got after it. There's also a happy hour at 5 o'clock, so hopefully you guys can stick around for that, featuring the Defense Business Accelerator. Lots of fantastic things going on. We've got a great panel of all founders talking about changing the rules, how to succeed in highly regulated industries. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
He told me to sit on the far side. We're trying to coordinate so that our microphones are in the right spots. Yeah. All right, we got it. Well, again, thank you, as Z said, thank you for being here today. This conversation, with the time that we have, and we have a nice little counter in the front, so we have 59 minutes to razzle and dazzle this audience with a really cool subject that everyone loves, regulations. Mm-hmm. I mean, it couldn't be more sexy at South by, could it, than regulations. But here's the cool part. This group of founders are seasoned and experienced in using regulations not just as, you know, bumpers left and right to build their business, but they've also managed to use it as a competitive edge. And so what I'm going to do is ask Jennifer and Eric and Joseph to very briefly give their bio of how they got to now and about their company. And then it's the very story of their company and their journey that we're going to get into about how they use regulations as a competitive edge, or, as you'll see, how they're actually influencing regulations going forward. So again, my name is Joseph Kopser. I'll talk a little bit about what I've done in this space, because I too, as a founder, participated in the regulatory environment. But without any further ado, Jennifer, tell us how you got to now.
Sure, and thanks for having me. So started the company 19 years ago. Kind of feels funny to still be a founder, but you go through a couple left turns as we all have done that. And what we've done to date is we've leveraged artificial intelligence to build the world's largest business relationship graph. And so what does that mean to all of us? So what we do today, and we're one of the many companies that benefited from what happened in the pandemic, we map and monitor global supply chains. Today, we map and monitor almost 500 million businesses around the world, north of 12 billion relationships between all of them. We look at about 400 trillion transactions a day, so it's speed and it's scale. 2 years ago, we hit unicorn. We hit a $1.2 billion valuation, which was thrilling. We could talk about that someday, but that's what we do. And so I think, you know, from a how did we get here many, many years ago, which I stopped counting, figured out that there was just a big disconnect between who we were doing business with, they were doing business with, and whether it was a good or bad thing. And I think the pandemic really proved that out.
Absolutely. Eric.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Eric Smith, co-founder and CEO of Keystone Tower Systems. We developed a new manufacturing process for towers for wind turbines, so the giant steel pole that holds the machine up. We invented and built machines that produce those. I started the company over 10 years ago as a technical founder. My background's mechanical and electrical engineering, and so I, was personally interested in politics, but had never done anything in DC, and kind of just stepped into this field with the goal of developing technology. Fast forward 10 years later, the Inflation Reduction Act comes out, the breaking news, everyone's like, how did this get through? How did they flip Manchin, all that? And I spent all night reading 1,000 pages of legislation.
Oh, you actually read it?
I read the whole thing. And the next week, had 2 senators propose an amendment to it on the floor of the Senate.
Nice.
And to get from knowing nothing about DC to feeling like, oh, I actually get to be a part of pulling on the rules is huge. And I also exited last year, and so I now get to talk a little more freely. So hopefully share with you guys some of the tips and tricks of how you can kind of, coming from a technology background, learn to sort of play in the regulation space.
Thank you. Joseph. The other Joseph. You're anchored on either end by Joseph.
So I'm Joseph Akintolayo. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Deposits, Inc. We're a financial services infrastructure company. Actually, the genesis of the formation, the germ that built what Deposits became was a congressional hackathon with the Alliance for Innovation Regulation. And so we were lucky to be part of this small little hackathon where we got all the insights into the workings of the CARES Act bill, and popularly created the PPP and all sorts of other things. And it was us, Wells Fargo, Plaid, like a whole bunch of unicorns, and I was just happy to be in the room, And that process basically gave me a baptism in working with regulators to actually deliver on the thing that they want. Right? When you're operating in a highly regulated industry, your product is also a product for their consumption. And so having that very close and intimate feedback loop was instrumental into what we ended up doing, which is building a Rosetta Stone for communicating with legacy financial infrastructure, a unified data model, and then no-code, low-code tools on top of that for accelerating the delivery of financial services. And how that's tied together is those germs and that inspiration trying to mobilize 11,000 financial institutions, which is 4 times as many as all the banks in Europe combined that all manage their own technology separately, to be able to deliver on a package that can basically save the economy. That's what we thought we were doing at that time anyways, with the MyCares Act. And we were able to use the primitives from Deposits to launch a platform that saved a whole bunch of businesses. Especially, I gave it away in partnership with the African American Credit Union Coalition, the oldest and largest in the country, and a whole bunch of CDFIs, and we had a 0% fraud rate, launched it in 2 weeks, and we're able to save hundreds of businesses that were getting turned away elsewhere. And that is a testament to what's possible when you start with your other customer, your regulators in mind.
Yes. So, you've heard their stories, but I want to just reinforce the importance of South by and what this conference really is about. And so for me, it is super personal, and why, depending on whatever age or stage you are in your career, in your life, or in your journey with your company, the stories you're going to hear and the lessons learned could apply in your life, in your journey, in your company. And so for me, it doesn't get any more personal than South by. As I was explaining to Jennifer, I asked, how is her South by? She's going to be in and out for this because she was able to spend the time with us and then has to get back to building her company. And then she said, well, how many for you? And I said, this is actually my 12th South by, because on this Sunday, the first Sunday of South by in 2012, I had an idea for a disruptive technology. It was called Ride Scout, to kind of think differently about the way we move transportation regulations. And I had a co-founder who said, well, let's see if we can get you into a South by pitch. And then if it works, maybe we'll try to raise some money and maybe we'll see if we can build a business. And it was 12 years ago this day at South by. I stood on a stage just like this, all alone with a microphone, pitching this disruptive technology called Ride Scout. And in the audience was that man right there, Craig Cummings in the front row, who, once he saw us win second place, said, I think Joseph and I are onto something. And sure enough, sitting next to him at the time was our first outside investor into the company. And that's how the ball rolls. That's what happens at South by. And then 5 rows behind him in this second aisle over to the right is Matt Loudon, who the next year I said, the Department of Defense, I was 20 years Army, has a lot of burdensome regulations around acquisition and procurement. And together we brought the defense community to Austin, and he hosted a conference literally 11 years ago called the Defense Energy Summit. Many of you all may know it now as Defense Tech Connect, one of the largest examples of bringing together innovators. And the reason why it's so special is his operation, Tech Connect, was acquired by our host, Advanced Technology International. So you sitting in these chairs, whether it's 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years, could be up on this stage telling your story about how you use regulations both as a competitive advantage and as a disruptor. So Jennifer, we're going to go back to you on the disruption side. Global supply chain and COVID, like you say, brought it all to the front. So what have you all been doing over the years that is pushing the envelope and pushing regulators and dare I say, making them uncomfortable? What does that look like? And then we'll get later into how you're now influencing regulation. But what's that journey look like?
Sure. So I think you actually heard a couple of the themes, and I've had personally the joy of testifying in front of Congress 7 times. And from a supply chain transparency standpoint and regulatory standpoint, it's everybody's job and nobody's job, and I think that's a bit of what you're hearing right here. So I think from a pushing on the standpoint is, for us, we're all about data. We're a big data company. If I don't have data, then I really don't have anything. And if I don't have data, I can't tell the truth. And so the interesting thing here in the States, like we literally post what we have for lunch that day, right?
Yes.
Like I had grilled cheese, everybody knows I had grilled cheese.
On Facebook, Instagram, and now TikTok.
Yes. Right now. So absolutely. But if you go to Germany, where we have the German Supply Chain Act, which is all about transparency of the supply chain, they will fine you for not having transparency of your supply chain, yet they also have data protection for not having to declare your data. It's really interesting. And it's not just Germany, pick your forward-looking country. And so from our standpoint, it's all around just bringing up ideas about that, which is everybody wants to have laws, they want to have regulations, they want to have fines, they want to hold you accountable, but then they don't make you do it or they don't allow you to do it. It's a really interesting situation, which is why we play both sides.
Yeah, and what I love to highlight is, since the founding of this country, really what you're talking about is security versus freedom. Like, we could have all the freedoms in the world, but if everybody could walk around and do whatever the heck we wanted, then we'd have no security. And to the other extreme, if we had every rule and regulation creating the world's greatest secure place to live, you have no freedom.
Well, and you two may, I just broke myself. You two may have a comment on this as well, in that it's really interesting because here in the States, like every other country wants to come here because they find us so innovative and forward-looking, yet they have laws that say they don't have to do it. And you guys might have a thought on that as well. But I find that like everybody wants to come to the States to learn. I'm like, no, you don't.
Yeah, Joseph, let's pick up with your experiences because of literally the origin story you told.
Yeah, so with regard to that, I'll give you an example, right? In my industry, we're seeing a total transformation in the paradigm of financial services, which is where it is delivered to you. It's delivered at the edge, in your hand, at the point of sale, at wherever you are, and not necessarily by the bank, right? The bank, that's easy. There's only 11,000 of them if you add up community, financial institutions, credit unions, all of them combined. It's easy to kind of just regulate those guys, right? Now, in the age that we live in, the Chimes, the Cash Apps, the PayPals, the Stripes, finance is embedded into our lives. And the person who onboarded us was a digital company. They're just a tech company. They're not a bank. They can't be regulated with the same measures. And so it's that push and pull. Are we going to slow down our economy so that we can, protect our financial infrastructure, sort out fraud, X, Y, and Z? Are we going to, basically lean into it and see how much growth we can get in the increase of transactions that we can accomplish, and just by doing our same transactions we do today faster? If you want to think about it from a kind of like a silly perspective of like why we need fintech, right? Let's just talk about moving money. It's Sunday today, right? We can't, right? We need all these different third parties to float and facilitate the settlement, right? Because the banks are closed. This is not something that exists in Europe, right, where things are real time, not even in West Africa, not in Asia, et cetera. We have the world's largest economy with super clunky lead pipes, right? Now, this is a really awesome opportunity for entrepreneurs to create value and value-added services upon those embeddings, right? And so the point I want to make here is that for us, right, we had to look at the future and say that all onboarding in financial services was going to be digital, right? So even if it's with the bank you already have, it's going to happen online, right? And it's going to be third party. It's going to be contextual. It's going to be about you and your workflows, et cetera. And anybody with a good relationship that has influence over the flow of funds or position in the flow of funds or some kind of advantage will essentially be able to operate as a bank, a pseudo bank. And so what can we do to balance that equation so regulators are happy, the banks which we require their sponsorship, right, to do anything because none of us are banks. We don't have the licensing to carry out any of these operations, are happy. And then there's still enough room and incentive for third parties, right, and service providers to be able to make a living and grow their businesses on top of what's left. And so, you know, for us, it's charting the course, right? The regulators are obviously very protectionist right now, right? So if you see in the news, especially after the failures of certain banks like Silicon Valley Bank, SCN, a few other banks, we've seen change, right? Which is, what can we do to make sure that we're protecting the rest of the economy from this contagion? And so for us, that's meant not necessarily agreeing at all times with our regulators, which is our customer, is reminding them of what the future will be, right? And say, instead of, you know, making really reactionist decisions right now, let's just close our eyes and imagine the future of financial services. And I want your work and my work to help us achieve that in a safe way and not necessarily slow us down or deter us from what I believe is just a brighter future.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing you say is common. And like I mentioned before, with Craig Cummings and I building Ride Scout, which aggregated together different modes of transportation. And what was really interesting to us as we got on this journey is, well, we were trying to put more people in public transit, more people in taxis, more people in bikes, more people on foot, meaning we're trying to get them out of their car to clog up Mopac or clog up I-35, trying to make it easier to do it. But to your point, older institutions resisted that because they're like, well, we're a bus operator. You can't have our logo inside your app. And I'm like, we're helping put people in your buses. Why would you find? So I'm hearing the same thing. We're trying to help people put money in your banks.
Exactly.
And yet you are the front door that they're very nervous about. So Eric, energy, boy, that's an institution, kind of has some legacy companies.
Yeah, for sure.
What does that look like to you in this same theme?
Yeah, so, and I think tying it back to the regulations side, when we started Keystone, the sort of, one of the limits, no one had ever built a wind turbine taller than 500 feet in the US. Today, wind energy is the cheapest power source available, period, if you're in the Texas Panhandle, if you're in Oklahoma, if you're somewhere where there are no trees and the strong winds can get close to the ground and you can reach them up at 500 feet.
Yeah.
But no one had ever built higher than that. The FAA had never even written down the rules to build higher than that. And so everyone in the industry thought, well, you're not allowed to build higher than that. The rule book says anything up to 500 feet, put a blinky red light on top of it, you're good to go. And then it's silent, right? It says nothing over 500 feet. And so we did a lot of work. We did work with DOE, throughout the industry, to show what's possible. Once you have the technology and the possibility of building higher than that, you can actually get up to strong winds throughout the country. The Department of Energy came out with this big study called the Nationwide Wind Report. Basically, how do we get this cheap power source out of the plain states and accessible throughout the country?
Yeah.
And so then finally the FAA did their homework, figured out what are the rules, what do we have to do to allow people to build turbines taller than 500 feet? 2 red lights. Instead of 1 red light, you put 2 on top of it.
So wait, 1 at 500? 1 at 500 to meet the original regulation, and then another one on the
Yeah, we can get up to 1,000 feet with 2. So as soon as they finally wrote down the rules, everyone went, oh, the vast majority of turbines that are planned for the next few years are over 500 feet. And the whole industry thought you just weren't allowed until we got them to sit down and write the rules. And so but it took years of teaching people, here's what's possible. This is what it's going to take in order to be able to spread this industry out of the plains and into the rest of the country. And it's because you're on the forefront, you're the first ones trying to breach these barriers that the rules aren't written yet, and you got to help the government write the right rules and see what the value is when they write good rules to sort of enable the industry to spread into new spaces.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. 20 years in the Army, a couple of trips through Iraq, and I remember our second trip to Iraq, they started rapidly fielding these vehicles known as the Buffalo because too many soldiers were getting blown up and tragically killed in Humvees that had a flat bottom. So you need to have a V shape so the boom goes up and out, not into the cabin. And they rushed them so quickly, they didn't put machine guns on top of it. So effectively, you have just a large truck to carry people, like a large van. It's well armored, but there was no armament on top. And then when we had our combat engineers were in the vehicle. They took me for a ride looking for IEDs one day and asked them, why does this thing not have a machine gun? They said, oh, because it didn't pass the safety test before coming over here. So I went down. No, that's true. You can laugh. That literally was said. Didn't pass the safety test before getting to combat. So we went to the contractor who was in the motor pool and said, is there a way that you can help us put that machine gun from that vehicle on top of that vehicle? He said, nah. I said, why? Didn't pass the safety test. I said, do you know how unsafe combat is? Especially when you don't have a machine gun? Why in the world is that the limiting factor until you ask the question, why?
Yep.
So, Jennifer, we've talked about the reaction to this, but now you, for instance, you mentioned 7 times testifying before Congress, and you have to keep going. How does one in this audience get to a point where they know they've got a disruptive technology? They know they have something that's going to push the edge. How are they ever going to get in a seat in front of a member of Congress to make that point? Or any regulatory body, if that's easier?
So I would not personally go to the regulators first. I actually agree with what Joseph said. We got a customer first. And you get a customer that wants to lean in. And we've been fortunate. I mean, again, I started the company 19 years ago with one good idea, which is mapping and monitoring the global supply chain. And that's all we've ever done. And so we've had, kind of ups and downs. But I think getting a couple examples like when Russia invaded Ukraine, in the first 10 business days after that occurred, 3,000 supply chain sanctions globally got levied against Russia.
Yeah.
And so all you needed was to find one customer that got hit a few times with sanctions that said they had to report to their CEO and to their board, and it would take them weeks on a minimum to go and reach out and to survey, and using our platform, it took them a couple hours.
Wow.
That was a humongous win. When Silicon Valley Bank went down, that was a great opportunity, right? Because the regulators nowhere were really looking at fourth and fifth party.
Yep.
And so if you think about it, the regulators for the bank, so critical infrastructure, was really focused on cloud providers because they were looking at for constant. So if AWS goes down, which it's really hard to manage against. And we said, think about Silicon Valley Bank, that's every industry, right? Like every bank is trying to figure out who can make payroll, who can't. And so we would have JP Morgan or pick your bank come to us. We have 50% of the world's largest banks use our platform. And actually would come to us and say, hey, we need to report to our board, our CEO. We were literally in a board report by name to Jamie Dimon in December because what we did for their third-party risk team. So I think getting ahead of the regulators and showing them what's possible. And then what we did, and you did something a little bit different, but you took a market. And we went after the Canadian market because you have 5 big banks. And 3 of the banks are already customers, big banks, and 2 more are coming this year. And we partnered with one of the big system integrators, and we just said, we're going. And we have all 3 of those banks plus OSFI, which is their regulator, now all working together using our platform. But we backed into the regulation, showed them what was possible. Most of regulatory, and you've touched on it, and you touched on it as well, Eric, it's risk mitigation, right? They want to make sure they're protected. Whereas you said something earlier, our best customers, one, they're out of the US because of how we operate. The second is half of it, the conversations moved on from security and like a risk posture to offensive and competitive.
Yep.
And so we have customers trying to figure out where to put investments 3, 5, 10 years from now and how to get ahead of what's going on and kind of doing simulation.
And for those of you, I'm building on that note, it's a nice segue to give another shame. By the way, I live in Austin, Texas. I'm so damn proud of this town. I'm going to give shameless plugs every chance I get. You may have seen that the Army, the military, is here in huge presence this year. They need disruptive technologies, but at the same time, as Matt Loudon, as I said earlier with his conference, is trying to help bridge that divide. But it was originally in 2015, 2 years after the conference was started here, that Secretary of Defense then, Ash Carter, came, and his whole point was, look, we have a choice, and this goes back to all things regulations. We can either be the turtle where we make a shell so thick it'll protect us from all of our enemies and all of the risks and all the hacks, but then that turtle is going to move real slow and our enemies could run around us. Or we could be more like the rabbit and just go really fast. No armament, just go really fast. And that constant tension, as I think what I'm hearing, which is why in many ways the military wants to be such a presence here at South by for the last few years go forward. They struggle with this. So Joseph, I see you nodding. Where have you seen this tension between, the turtle trying to have a thick shell around finance and the rabbit moving fast to be able to help people grow businesses and access capital, create dreams, and build on them?
So, well, I'll give you an example with the bank sponsor model and banking as a service. So I will hire this third-party service provider, and they will help me onboard my customers and do the third-party risk management to a fourth party, which may also be onboarding their own customers. This was all possible because of the API revolution, right? So I can basically teleport the ability to create a bank account or move money or do KYC, know your consumer, KYB, know your business, right? All, over the air in real time. And create regulated financial accounts, demand deposit accounts, FBO accounts, et cetera. The challenge with this is the excitement around APIs was the same thing, the excitement around cloud. Let's make sure it's secure. What are we doing around, IP security, firewalls?
Hey, can I interrupt real quick? For those of you that don't know what an API is, it's critical to this conversation because of how easily it allows other people to get into your data. Joseph, do you want to just explain what an API is?
It's like a telephone between computers, right? Just imagine like two string cans between computers, and this computer can just be really good at one thing, and this computer can be really good at another thing, and they send messages back and forth to each other to accomplish it, right? And so, and everyone doesn't have to know everything to get the job done, right? And you can do this over and over again. And so if I want the ability to text everybody in this room on Earth, I can just send an API call from something I set up right now to Twilio, which has then set APIs to all the major telecom providers, and I can then text you in real time. And so in essence, it's just it's a magic connection between two computers.
Yep.
Now, one that you really, really have to secure, though, right? And we have a lot of things in our country, like if I have your bank account number, I don't have you. I don't know your name, I don't know anything. In most other countries, it's not like this. They have something called a bank verification number. And so one good thing that it does is you can't send money to the wrong account, right? If you ever typed in your routing number and your account number and you have to do it twice and you double confirm, that kind of fat fingering and mistakes with account numbers on purpose and as a measure of fraud is like $30 billion a year, which is crazy, just because I can't tie a number to a name. Now, so that just gives you and that's how we want to keep it, right? We want to keep it that way because of our privacy laws, right? Which is a little bit different than what you have overseas. And so it's a trade-off between the $30 billion of savings you get from people not accidentally sending money to the wrong accounts or fraudulent accounts. But, obviously it's, the trade-off is that, again, it's the security versus the freedom.
Yep.
And so we focused on security a little bit too much. In essence, it was all around, are the APIs secure? Who all has access to the data? All of that. And forgetting that financial services largely exist in the product. They exist in the interface. They don't exist on the API. And so it created this complete asymmetry that then led to a lot of problems down the road. Right? So if I'm a sponsor bank and I have this partner or program manager who's onboarding, the next Chase or Chime or whatever, and they're all onboarding their own customers differently. All I did was give them an API. They make their interface, they make their app, they do whatever, right? But at the end of the day, Reg E, that's individual, like financial regulations, almost 100,000 different things. You can write the disclosure wrong and come up on $1 million fine. And when you're having, third parties and fourth parties do that, and you say, well, everything checks out because the API is fine, it's a complete, lack of understanding of the entire purpose. And so one position that we took was we stayed very, very early on that, it's not the API, it's the interface. Right? And there was not a single low-code, no-code provider that was saying, I'm going to make thematic, brandable, composable interfaces that are compliant so other people don't have to. Essentially like a Shopify for financial services. And we were the first people to say that. And I remember, people kind of laughter or, no, that doesn't make sense or blah, blah, blah. But we had our eye on the future, and we knew that there was just no way, especially for a company of our size, to police our customers that much, right, to protect the sponsor bank, to then protect them from the regulators, right? There was just no way that we could police them if we weren't setting the guardrails. And, 4 years later, right, that thing that we knew, and that was our position, that was how we raised capital, right? That thing is now where everyone is going. And we were able to influence regulators as well and say it doesn't make sense any other kind of way.
And so let's build on that, Eric, and I'm looking to you now, and the same question I posed to Jennifer, which is, in this audience, there are founders, inventors, folks with ideas that they know that that industry needs to be disrupted, or they need to use that regulation as a competitive advantage, whichever side of the coin they're on, probably both many times. How do they get to that point? Jennifer said maybe not go straight to the regulators. What is the path that they should start taking? What's that look like? Maybe stay up all night and read all 1,000 pages.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so as a startup, you're small and nimble. You're able to figure out how to craft your business to take advantage of an opportunity that's out there. You don't have to do it the way you've been doing it for 10 years because you haven't been doing it for 10 years, right?
Yep.
And so I think, first off, really understanding exactly the rules, and it's convenient in a regulated industry, they're all written down for you, right? So really understanding the rules you're playing in and looking for, where's the corner in here that you can, you know that you can get an advantage. That's great. You should absolutely start there. The long game of being a part of the community that's actually rewriting the rules, that can be a huge game changer, but that's it takes years of getting to know the right people, getting, really getting in there and being respected. It's not like the day they're writing the rules, that's when you call them up and say, hey, change this. You need to have known them for a long time and know the person on the staff who focuses in that corner of this policy, and you've given them feedback for years, and then that's when the critical call can happen. And so influencing it is a long game. It's hard, and often that timeline, it's tricky to make that line up with a startup. And so I guess I'd say, for sure, play the game of what's out there today. And if you're going to run a 20-year company, absolutely play in helping to write the rules, because if you can write the rules, then you can make sure that the world is shaped in the way that works well for you. But it also can be this, if it's a make or break thing and you put 2 years into it and it doesn't come out the way you want it to, then that can be a hard game for a really fast-moving startup. In energy, I mean, we were playing the long game from the start, so our timing kind of worked, and the hard part for us was actually making the fact that we were playing a long game fit within the startup world, but that's a different story.
And I think there's two clear examples of how to do, the choice that you just made. Call them opposite ends. On one end, you have companies like Markup, which if you haven't heard about Markup and you're in this room for regulatory reasons, you should probably look up Markup. And what they do is they track all, and I'm going to get their pitch wrong, but what they do is they track all of the legislation that's moving through various levels of government. And anytime a committee or a subcommittee makes a change to a potential future law, that markup gets highlighted digitally and instantly because it's a part of the public record. But in the olden days, you had to go out and pay lobbyists and lawyers to be able to find this. Now, groups like Markup let you work the inside. Then the other extreme, if you've been watched the movie Super Pumped, you got Travis Kalanick, who just said rules and regulations, nah, doesn't matter. And he just did his own thing. Now, he found himself in court, almost found himself in jail, but he disrupted an industry in that regard. So let's talk long term with each one of the three of you. And by the way, we're getting ready to go to question and answer, and there's a microphone over here. But what are the long game changes you think in your particular industry that you're most excited about, or in case there's any members of Congress in the audience, what you're worried about?
Yeah,
Pick it either way.
So I can do both. To Eric's point, we've been at it for a while. I think the first thing to understand is when I started the company, technology was not where it is today, right? So as all of us, from a founder, from a startup, scale up, whatever you consider yourself to be, it's always taking advantage of whatever's in front of you, whatever's coming, and trying to influence it. When I started the company for 14 years, we were a services company because tech didn't exist. And so, converted pretty successfully in 2012, didn't get funding until 2019. So I bootstrapped the company for the first X amount of years.
Good on you. Well done.
2014. And then actually hired engineers to hand label. So Carnegie Mellon came to us to figure out where we got our training data, and we told them we built it. And so at that point in time, it was a big differentiator, not so much anymore with AI, Gen AI, and everything. And so to your point, what's next? I do think one of the things that Eric mentioned, and Joseph, we were able to raise during the flush times over the last few years. It's not real flush right now. So now I wouldn't say we're being forced, but we're being taken a breath, if you will, to say, do we double down on industries and really just try to own them? Or do we become this kind of supply chain nerve center? Like when we pitched the investors, it was all about becoming this self-healing supply chain. You want to do exception management. Nobody wants to manage their supply chain. Talk to anybody. There's no four walls. And so it's really, do you want to do an industry, or do you want to become this thing that SAP and Oracle or ServiceNow or pick your technology, they cannot do their job without? And that's where the regulators for us are becoming really material, because if I can influence the regulators, now all those companies have to pay attention to us. And that's really, when you ask me a question of what are we looking at, we're influencing the regulators, because in several critical infrastructure sectors, they've really picked up. We have the entire country of Singapore standardizing on our platform. Like, that doesn't happen to just everybody, I don't think. We have the entire financial sector that's looking to standardize. So those things are happening. But I think to your question, from my standpoint as CEO, it's like, where do I take the company over the next 3 to 5 years? And it's somewhere in between the two, that nerve center or within an industry. But no matter what, being that self-healing supply chain that aligns with the private sector and the regulators, that's where we live.
Yeah, and I interrupt this presently scheduled panel to do some quick South by Southwest networking real quick. So are you tracking Carol Fowler and the work she's doing at Transmute, which sounds very similar to that?
No.
I'm gonna make sure after this that you and Carol Fowler are connected, because what Transmute is doing is very similar. Okay, we resume the panel.
Commercial.
Yep, there we go. But that's what South by is all about. All right.
You like this in the Army?
Did I what?
Were you like this when you were
I was like this since I was a kid.
Good
My high school principal tried to fire me from being the student council president because, as he told Mr. Willoughby, our sponsor, he's like, Harold was his name. Harold, I got one more year before I retire, and this Kopser guy is driving me crazy with all these ideas and programs. So anyway, yes, I've been like this since I was a kid.
Okay.
All right, Eric. What you hope for, what you fear for.
Yeah.
Either way.
So honestly, I'm good with where we are. Like the Inflation Reduction Act that's the policy of a generation right there. We are set for over a decade. And really, when you're building the electric grid, power generation, you're building these assets that last 50 plus years, you really do need 10 plus years of policy visibility. And we got that. And so I'm actually very happy with where we've landed. And the industry is now in the hunker down and deliver mode. Where right now, you're not seeing as much construction of new power plants because everyone's busy hunkered down building the new factories to build all the components. But you're going to see a massive, massive wave of wind and solar, batteries, renewables coming online over the next 10 to 15 years. And all thanks to mostly the Inflation Reduction Act, some the infrastructure bill, but the pieces of Build Back Better that were enacted, that was a year and a half ago or so. So let interest rates come back down, and we're off to the races.
There you go. No, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And I will also recommend sustainment.com for all of that manufacturing and finding those machine shops as they build. So Joseph, what are you hoping for? What are you a little bit fearful of? What are you looking at the regulatory environment?
I'll start with what I'm fearful of. I'm fearful of hyper-consolidation of our financial services. There's a trend right now that is kind of hard to pull back, and it's the M&A and activity, right? Sorry, investment bankers, but everybody else, the M&A activity for community banks, even credit unions. You can think of them as highly regulated small businesses, but essential to the lifeblood of our economy. They are, we all talk about small business. Well, they're the ones that are there for small business. On top of that, they're more likely to see somebody as risk-worthy and not just credit-worthy, which is a total different paradigm shift from, banks based on the coast that are doing everything algorithmically. There is a lot of burden on them, right? A lot of regulatory burden on them. And the key is to find a balance where they can do what they do, right? And they're regulated in a way that's fair for them and their size, while we still put the necessary scrutiny on the Silicon Valley banks and on the JP Morgans and on all of those. And that the will to make things easier for, let's say, the mom and pop bank doesn't get used to subvert the need to regulate the larger institutions. So that's my fear. My hope is that we can settle on a model and a few service providers, technology providers, kind of act as a node or a synapse or something that's just essential, right, to be able to carry business emerge, where people can own it in-house and see have full visibility and audit trail of all the data, and just another tool in their toolbox that allows them to be more nimble and meet the needs of the future economy, right? Their customers' unmet technology needs, even unmet emotional needs, right? But that this heavy burden of regulation and tracking and auditing and walking on eggshells doesn't slow down their ability to do business and our ability to serve them. And so that's my view.
I like it. Okay, so we're going to take questions from the audience. There's a microphone over here. And if you're going to make your way, we got first one coming. So before you start talking, or we get to your question, I just want to do something to make sure you all understand how hard this is to do. And Colin, right? Colin and his team have made this sound so perfect today, and I do a lot of speaking, a lot of panels, and I've literally never heard one this good. So your team has been doing phenomenal. Now, I hope that didn't jinx you. Hope it didn't jinx you. But I want to give you props for that. So please, go ahead, say your name, quick pitch if you want, whatever you're doing. But
I'm Jack, and I understand that regulation can slow down disruptive business and make it difficult to do some emergent technology. But what I've seen lately is sometimes trust and safety gets thrown out as well, right? So while regulation is going to slow us down, let's try to subvert that, go just fast, go quicker. But then it's like trust and safety, that's slowing us down too. We can't have that here. And that's hard for me to grasp of, that doesn't sound right to throw out trust and safety. That sounds important. So maybe you can express on why trust and safety is, where's the balance? Should there be a dedicated trust and safety team to make sure we're doing things right? Or is that also slowing us down the same as regulators and it should be thrown out?
Yeah, it's Jack, right?
Yeah.
I want to apologize in advance. I'm the person who clicks terms and conditions without reading them. So I'm probably on one edge of that question. But where do you all want to fill in on that? Where is that blend? Where's that middle ground?
I'm happy to go, but.
Yeah, I can say, right, we're probably not the very best audience. I'll tell you why. When you're a founder of a startup, you're just doing your best. You're trying to figure it all out as you go. You've jumped out of an airplane and you're trying to build a parachute, and then you're also trying to build another airplane, right? And if you're working at the same time, and then if you're working in a highly regulated industry, you're also asking everybody for permission. Am I building my airplane right? While you're afraid of near sudden death at any given moment.
Or hitting one of Eric's 1,000-foot towers.
Exactly. And so, I believe strongly, right, that trust and safety are fantastic, right? We need our consumers, we need everybody, every stakeholder to believe in the system, right? That's something that I'm a strong believer of. I feel, though, that may be difficult for early stage companies to accomplish for lots of different reasons, funding, et cetera. I mean, to get the kind of compliance officer that we needed, it took a miracle, an act of God, connections and X, Y, and Z. It's very expensive, right? And so we need to make it a little bit easier, right, for people to get started. And the challenge that I see of being an entrepreneur in a highly regulated industry is, it's very difficult to just get started. Most things, right, especially technology, all you need is a computer, right? And it's not like that necessarily for us in the highly regulated industries. And it means that we're also missing out on so many innovators and so many people because just what they need to get started is not common. Right? It's just you don't find them growing around a trust and safety team or like a chief compliance officer or people to manage a third-party risk or investor relations or anything like that. And so the answer is yes, I would love it everywhere, but I have to be honest with you and say that it's impractical for early stage businesses.
Thank you.
Yeah, that you have to accept risk at some point. Anybody else want to build on that, or
I'll say something real quick.
Please.
As Jack's walking away, I think from our standpoint, just being maybe a little bit further, some of it is where you're starting versus where you want to get to. And so over the last 12 months, we've converted 60-some% of our contracts from 1 year to 3 year, so that we don't have everything net new, which to your point, some of it's maturity, and some of it is I can continue to build a plane while maturing 60-some% of our programs. And I think that what we have found from a risk standpoint is when you start going towards not just the short term, but the longer term and going for advanced funding. I mean, our contract values grew from, kind of something small till something like $6 million a year, and they're going to continue to go year after year. And so I think some of it's being able to differentiate between the two, which doesn't mean giving one up, but just making sure you don't have any artificial blockers, because trust and safety will stop you. And I agree with you. I'll see that every single time.
Yeah. And something, I have a question?
It's more of an observation.
Yeah, but before you get to it, I just wanted to make sure you were queuing. What I want to point out, a little different than most panels, is I want you all on your phones, and I want you to go back to that link for this panel and follow all three of them on LinkedIn, because they are the cutting edge of what we're talking about. So unlike most places say, please put your phones away, I like saying, get your phones out and follow these three. So please, sir.
Yeah, right on. Steve Palmer, so I guess follow me as well. You brought up Super Pumped. I've advised Uber for 12 years, helped them open up the US market, handled all their government affairs, local, national. And we always, when you think about if you're building out a disruptive company, you always have to focus on what it is you're trying to solve for, and don't try to become the next Uber. More times than not, we're always trying to advise people, be authentic in what it is you're trying to solve for. The pathway that we drove at Uber is very different. We changed a lot of rules that is going to impact your ability to go to market just the way we did, but don't lose faith and hope. In that regard, we're doing it every day, and just want to tell you thank you for having the courage to sit up there and talk about the stories, because we deal with companies who are facing it on an ongoing basis, and we do the government affairs side, so
yeah.
Kudos to keep it rolling.
Well, Steve, I want to give you props too. Ride Scout couldn't have been Ride Scout had Uber not been pushing that envelope in the transportation world. And so when we sold to Mercedes, it was only because Mercedes saw changes in the future of mobility and transportation. So I should buy you a beer afterwards. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, totally.
I think we have another question. Craig Cummings.
You're the best, Joseph.
Oh,
I mean, what an honor to be that guy's co-founder, right? Seriously. Anyway, so Joseph and I are asked very often, right, as Army veterans, how do you think about the election? How do you think about it with respect to defense and what's going to happen with the Defense Department with the Republican or Democrat, Trump or Biden? And so I just throw that over to you. How are you three thinking about this election? And like, is one going to be better than the other, or is it just the network is the network? It's going to be highly regulated.
Yeah, let me use moderator privilege to refine that point too of where he's going, which is there is a lot of legislations out there. There is a lot of regulations going in one particular direction. Can one administration to another make that much of a change to impact the direction of where you all are going?
Perfect. Thank you, Jay.
Oh, thank you, Craig.
Said a different way. So I'll speak for myself. So will it impact me? So I think whoever's president's my president. That's kind of how I live in Washington, D.C. So that's kind of my answer. But I think also from a supply chain standpoint, I think Department of Commerce published last year, year over year, the impact to the global supply chain was $3 trillion.
Wow.
$3 trillion year over year. Nobody can sustain that way. And so I don't know many elected officials that will take that on in mass. There are various officials that we've talked to that live in like places that protect trees, right? I'm not going to win that.
Trees?
Rest.
Okay.
So I'm not going to win that, or I may win that based on how they feel that day because of what got them elected. But I think from a federal standpoint, from a Department of Defense standpoint, from fighting the good fight that night, from making sure we're resilient in security, not a lot of people are going to argue with protecting national security, intellectual property, the people of your country. And our platform has already extended into multiple countries. So from a legislative standpoint, we're not going to be impacted. Personally, does it keep me awake at night? Sure. But from a business standpoint, I don't think anybody's going to fight the fight around supply chain.
Yeah. Eric, can one administration to another have an impact?
So the commercial wind industry, despite all of the talk of windmills killing birds and whatnot, did very well during the first Trump administration. So for all of the noise, we built a lot of wind farms during those 4 years. But the chunks of the executive branch that I dealt with became pretty dysfunctional. So, I mean, you see real impact.
Okay.
But we've got the legislation signed into law that we need now to run with it. And it's going to take a lot to reverse that. It's going to take both houses of Congress and the executive branch. So
yeah, like turning a battleship. Once you get going in one particular way, you can change if you want, but it's going to take a while to go back.
So I think so there for sure, politics can swing us, but I think most people in the wind industry feel pretty comfortable that the trajectory we're on right now is going to be okay. That said, all of the stuff that's supported by DOE, I would be concerned about what happens in a change of administration.
Okay, and with 10 minutes left, I'm just keeping an eye. We got another question, but Joseph, what are your impacts? New administration, which way does it matter?
I think it matters a little bit because there's generally like a current of like either we want more regulations or we want to deregulate, right? That's just, it depends what side of the coin you're on and what regulations people are excited about, right? Or that they feel like align with their causes. And so how it affects my business or my overview is that, we manage our roadmaps, right? We manage this is what we want to do this year. This is what the next 4 years look like for us. And we also manage our audiences and our stakeholders. And so just like if you're pitching an investor, you might tailor your message to that person. It's all about, not necessarily changing your position, but knowing how to communicate your position, your value, and its benefits so that, it's not clearly at odds. Sometimes you can't always do that, but so that it's not clearly at odds with the goals or directives of any given regulator during any given political wind. And so your North Star has to be stronger, right? You create your own gravity, and as long as you have that, right, you can tell your story in such a way that'll align, right? And for the most part, we have good meaning people in our government who want to actually do things that they earnestly believe are good for us and the economy and the future and their children, what have you. And so I don't necessarily go into it thinking that these are, that we're sitting on an opposite side of the table at all. I think we're sitting on the same side of the table.
Yeah, in fact, reminds me of a story in the Pentagon. If you want to know who gets stuff done and who will outlast from one administration to another to really make change, it's anybody wearing tennis shoes. And what I mean by that is they've been around the Pentagon, that hard marble, long enough. They're done wearing boots and dress shoes and high heels. They wear tennis shoes because they're there to last and they want to make lasting impact. So please.
Hello, I'm Charles, a startup ecosystem builder in Pittsburgh, PA. Obviously, core competencies in life sciences, robotics, energy supply chain, et cetera. Do a lot of work with CMU. My question is, from a startup ecosystem standpoint, what are ways in which we can support startups in these heavily regulated spaces, right?
Can you say that last
What are ways we can, support startups in these heavily regulated spaces? Kind of any high priority things that you'd be looking for, like as an institution that's trying to make it easier to build in Pittsburgh, that, for happenstance has a lot of startups working in these spaces?
Yeah, I've got an answer to that, but I want to open up the panel if they got anything. What would you say to startups that are looking for that, incubator, that safe place where they can get that support that they can't get until they're much larger?
I mean, I lived in Pittsburgh for a few years, so I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure what Pittsburgh cares about right now. Do you know what their high priorities are?
Are you talking about from an industry standpoint?
Well, you're asking us how do they get support. So support for what industries?
Just I was mainly thinking of like, okay, like you're a small company, maybe you don't understand. You're a small startup, maybe you don't understand the legislative landscape of like what are the holes you can dig in, like what are just any ideas for like high priority programs, systems, interventions you can make to just make it easier to provide those resources. What are the resources that you target, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking PTAP, and I don't know if Pittsburgh has it. Do you know?
Well, sort of, but regardless of region, again, another cool thing about South by, yesterday the administrator of the Small Business Administration was here.
Yeah.
She was telling the stories about programs like PTAX and the Small Business Development Centers, and they're all over the U.S., but they generally take on the flavor of that city or region. So that's a resource, and it is grossly underused. Grossly. Startups rarely use the SBA like they could. And then in addition to that, there are lots of usually university-based incubators, accelerators, but then some communities, shameless plug, some communities like Austin, we have one place called the Capital Factory. If you haven't visited yet, go see the Capital Factory. They attract entrepreneurs and startups, and therefore they attract lawyers and regulators and members of community who want to, A, see them be successful, and B, want to be a part of that upside. I mean, this is capitalism after all. We're not just, this isn't just charity, but they want to see them be successful so they can be a part of that team. And so I would bet it's there in Pittsburgh. We just got to dig a little deeper, find it. Anything to add to that? Okay, we have a couple minutes left for any other questions. If not, I'm going to give an anecdote. Oh, please.
Is that another shameless plug?
Nope. Okay. This gentleman is a very friendly person I have not yet met, I don't think.
Hey, nice to meet you. I'm Alex Sharastani. I also live in Austin.
There you go.
So I'm an AI developer, but I'm also an attorney, and I've had some struggles with getting into the legal industry. There's like a lot of pushback. And so what I've been looking for during South by is any highly regulated area that you think should be tackled. And so I figure you all would be the right people to ask.
Yeah, I would think the financial sector is ripe. I mean, all of our financial customers are using it, so.
Yeah, financial monitoring, third-party risk management, auditing of contracts. Yeah, these are some key areas, right? Onboarding, right? And more specifically, going back and looking at what's already been done, right? So there's, every day there's new tools that are going into market, but that kind of unification, right, and visibility, are there things that we need to go back and fix before they blow up, right? I could see myself purchasing a product like that, right?
I think anything, to Joseph's point, anything that can be done, like your background's perfect, because anything that can be done over and over and over and over again is exactly what they're willing. I mean, so from a
law.
I'm sorry?
The law.
That's what I'm saying. Your background's perfect.
Yeah.
So all of the conversations, so I work on a lot of committees, and one of them's around artificial intelligence. And from a U.S. federal government, it's all around contracting. Can I get the contracts 80% of the way there, and then 20% needs to be negotiated? And how do I use artificial intelligence in all of its, personalities, if you will, to get us there? So to your point, looking back to seeing what has been done over and over and over, everybody's trying to speed it up. To Joseph's point, we firmly fit in any organization, and when I say any, we'll call it 85% of them, under procurement, wherever that sits, and under third-party risk. And they are all leveraging artificial intelligence. And I think that if you think about your background, anything that is done by rote, that can be done over and over, I mean, that's a massive, and whether you're dedicated or you're part of a pool or part of whatever that, just kind of free yourself to that one, but that is a big calling. And it's not the only one. Your industry probably sees it a lot as well.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a great fit for you, but one regulation that is new as of the IRA that I think is a big opportunity that I'm not sure is fully being chased yet is that there are apprenticeship and living wage requirements for everyone working in all of these new factories that are being built for renewable energies, all the construction companies, everything, and the tax breaks that are associated with these are massive, enough that it will happen. And so how all of these new factories, guarantee that they meet all of the IRS requirements for apprenticeship programs and so on, I think is I think that that's an important problem to solve, and it's a brand new one as of a year ago.
And yeah, and the area I'd push you into or to consider investigating is in the healthcare industry around healthcare data. Like, I carry around in my phone enough data about my fitness, mental state, heartbeat, everything, and I want to be able to share it better with tools and companies and API calls that will help teach me more about what I'm doing. But there's so many laws there. And then related to healthcare, speaking of the defense industry, which I know well, the transfer of medical records from the Department of Defense to the Department of Veterans Affairs is an abomination. And it's all about law, and it's all about how you're allowed to share different data and privacy. So I definitely push you in that direction. So any last questions or comments before we're going to wrap up? So what I want to do here in the end is a couple of things, which is to remind everybody here that whatever that idea is that you have to disrupt, it's probably right. A lot of other people have that same pain point. They maybe just don't realize it until one of you all come forward and start pushing on it and making it easier. And like Jennifer said, reports can go from weeks or months on end to a matter of hours. And that's something that you can do and disrupt. But all of this wouldn't be possible, though, without ATI, Advanced Technology International, that helped put all this together. Special shout out to Christopher Zimber here in the front row that herded all these cats and got all of us together. Colin and the crew, we didn't jinx it. It worked the whole way through. And most importantly, I want you all to thank our guests that all came in for this panel. Give them a big hand. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.